call you Mo. That's what your friends call you. You were the general manager and then president of baseball operations for my favorite team, the St. Louis Cardinals, from 2007 to 2025. And you originally came to the Cardinals in 1995, working for then general manager Walt Jocketty, a legend in his own right. I have to start by asking you, when you were early in your career, did you ever picture yourself as a general manager of the St. Louis Cardinals when you started out?
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I grew up in Boulder, Colorado. At the time, there was no Major League Baseball team, so the two clubs I followed most closely were the Kansas City Royals and the St. Louis Cardinals. And my little trash can in my bedroom was the St. Louis Cardinals. But to ever think I was actually going to be the general manager of that team was never in my wildest dreams.
So I have to ask you a question. It's something I've always wondered. What percentage of your decisions as a general manager are made on analytics versus just your gut instincts? And has that ratio changed over your career?
Oh, of course it's changed. Obviously, you can think about like the tools now we have available from the analytical world. Decision making, I won't say is easier, but there's more confidence in what you're doing. But there are times where sometimes you just have to make that decision and you have to go with your gut. But clearly, when you look at what we can capture in the game of baseball now, think back to like the early 2000s when we started even dabbling in the analytical world. What we used to capture in a year, we now capture in a night.
Hmm.
So it just shows you the amount of information we have.
All right, I have to ask. So, was there ever a moment, and does anyone come to mind, where the analytics said, Mo, you don't want to sign this guy. This is not the right fit for the Cardinals, but your gut said, I don't know, I'm going to sign this guy. Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I mean there are a lot, but I think my favorite story on that might be Berkman
Oh,
when he was, kind of struggling at the end of his career. Math was not really in favor of signing him, and so we went ahead and did it just because I heard he was such a great guy in the clubhouse, and of course he was part of that magical 2011 run and really integral part of it. So, for sure, there's times where you have to deviate, but obviously when you're making multi-million dollar decisions, you're trying to do it in a way that you can justify not only for just how you think about something, but how you can defend it because of the math.
so yeah, when you make a gut call like that, and you got to go to the owners and say, "Look, I'm making a gut call here." How much do they question you? How much trust is there? What are those conversations like between general managers and owners when I mean millions of dollars on the line here?
Yeah, I can imagine it's different for all of us. I mean, obviously it's a pretty small fraternity. There's 30 of us and 30 owners. But for me, my relationship, I've worked with Bill DeWitt for 30 years. And so, over the course of that time, our trust with each other just grew. And so the conversations became a little bit simpler, quicker. But obviously, you think back in my career and some of the major decisions or crossroads that I had to deal with. At the end of 2011, Albert Pujols becomes
Mm.
a free agent. And of course, that was hundreds of million-dollar decision. And, we relied a lot on our resources in terms of analytics to make that decision. But ultimately, it came down to where the player wanted to be. But, Bill and I agonized over that. And, you have, arguably at the moment in time, the best player on earth, and he's walking away from you. That's tough.
Yeah, that was well for all Cardinal fans. I mean, that was something we'll never forget. But you also then made the decision to bring him back at the end of his career, and that turned out to be, I think, one of the most popular things the Cardinals have done in recent memory. Was it hard to bring Albert back? Did you agonize over that, or were you thinking, no, no, this is an easy call?
It would seem like an easy call, right? Because we know the ending. But I remember Ollie, our manager, reached out to me in spring training. He said, "Hey, Albert wants to talk to you." So I'm leaving Port St. Lucie as in spring training, driving back down to Jupiter, and Albert and I are talking on the phone. And like my biggest concern was, what happens if this doesn't work?
Mm.
Like, how do we actually have a divorce where both sides look okay? And that was my biggest concern. Obviously, it never came to that. And, it became almost sort of like a Cinderella story, really, at the end because it was magical.
Oh, it was. And Cardinal fans were following Albert around the country and following the home run chase. I mean, it was one of the most thrilling things I think that happened to the franchise, and that was a great decision that you guys made. I want to ask you about another specific player, maybe a name that many of our listeners don't know, but a fellow named Oscar Taveras, a young Cardinal prospect, was one of the top prospects in all of baseball. He died tragically in a car accident in 2014. I'm sure this was one of the most tragic moments that you had to deal with in your career. I've always wondered when something like that happens, A, how does that impact the emotional state of an organization, of a clubhouse? And B, do you look back on that moment and ever wonder, the loss of Tavares, did that really alter the trajectory of the Cardinals franchise?
Yeah, a couple things. Obviously, unfortunately, I've been a part of a couple deaths with from the Major League Club, Daryl Kyle, and then Josh Hancock, and then of course Oscar Taveras. And I think when you think about like what does that impact look like to a clubhouse, the Daryl Kyle one I think was like the most impactful in the sense of like it was a tragedy that everybody had to like actually live through because it happened in the season. We were all together. And so that one was, that really tore people apart, but yet we still had a pretty magical year of trying to find ways to bond. Josh Hancock, beginning of a season, he's a younger player, a little bit less known. Clearly you lose a teammate, it's tough. And then Oscar's case, he was just emerging. As you said, he was a prospect. I don't feel like from a clubhouse standpoint, it was like that knee jerking, but I think from an organizational standpoint, it really was because we had envisioned him being our number three hitter for the next 10 years.
Right.
I'm not comparing him to Albert Pujols, but we did think he was going to be that type of impact offensive player that we could build around. And then when you lose that, guess what? You're going to the trade market or you're going to the free agent market because you don't develop many of those very often.
All right. One last question on what it's like to be a general manager before we get into the business of baseball. And here it is. You make a decision. You choose to trade a guy. You choose to let a guy go. How often do you get on your laptop for the next year and track that person's stats and analytics every single day? Thinking, did I do the right thing here? Did I do the right thing? I mean, of course, in the fan base, we all sit around spending all of our time second guessing, what general managers and front offices do. Do you have time to dwell on that, or do you just have to move on?
So I personally don't have time to dwell on it, but I did have somebody like in my office that would track players that we traded or had some connection to that we will always want to sort of follow. That way I wouldn't have to dig. So I could just quickly go to our dashboard, pull up the player's name and really see how they're doing. And, look, like I've always said this in my job, like it's fun, it's amazing, it's super cool. But the thing I least liked about it was trading players because you get to know these guys. They have families, they become friends, and it's a tough part of the job. And when I look back at my career in terms of like dealing with the free agent market, dealing with the draft, or whatever aspects it is, just trading players is a tough thing to do.
What's always been incredible to me is that players who've come through St. Louis, even when they leave, a lot of them maintain community relations with St. Louis. They live in St. Louis. They continue to do charitable works in St. Louis. Is St. Louis unique in that, you think, in just its term, in terms of its ability to have that connective tissue with players who, even after they've left the organization?
Again, I can't speak for 29 other organizations, but I can say this, like St. Louis is just an easy place to play. Um, Fans adore you. Traffic is light. It's easy to get in and out. It's just a very desirable place for to play. And so, like when we've acquired players in a trade, they tend to want to stay here. So we end up extending them. Free agent market, it's never been really having to sell the city because players know. I mean, you think about our travel. We bop to Milwaukee, Chicago, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh. These are not like grinding flights. Most of our schedule is pretty easy to maintain. And then our fan base historically has been something that just embraces this team. And so, we've tried to really take advantage of that when we get players to have interest in this city.
All right, I want to talk about the business of baseball. We both love baseball. It's our national pastime. For me, I'm a fan. I follow the Cardinals religiously, but for you and the job that you had, You're running a multi-billion dollar business. Business decisions do factor into things that sometimes frustrate fans. You have the human aspect of developing players, but then you also have the financial side to deal with. Every team has a budget. You have to figure out how to put the best team on the field with the budget that you've gotten from your ownership. I want to ask first, has the business end of this always been so dominant in our baseball discourse, or is it just feel like it's more dominant today because we all have more access to information? And the financial disparities among teams, how much of that do you think has changed over time, and how much of that is affecting the relationship between front offices and fan bases?
Yeah, a lot to touch on there, but I think disparity is really the key word there. Obviously, when you think back to 30 years ago, payrolls were much tighter. In other words, the lowest to the highest didn't have such a large gap. You look at what's happening today, where you have really five teams that, if you took the aggregate of their payroll, would get to the Los Angeles Dodgers, for example.
Mm.
And so the disparity is become, really glaring. And when you think about it from a fan base standpoint, the one thing, as when you think back to like your childhood, and you'd follow your team and spring training, and that opening day would come, and there was just that, like, you had hope. What's happening now in sports is it's hard to sell hope, because people know what's going on. And if you're going up and competing against teams that have a 250 or 350 million dollar payroll, and you're playing at 125 million, you got to have a lot of things go right. And it can happen. I mean, Milwaukee Brewers, for example, this past year, they don't have a huge payroll, but they had a lot of things go right for them. But their margins, like, they cannot make mistakes. And so when you think about the business model right now, how does baseball get to a place where competitive balance isn't just a two-word phrase, but it has like real teeth? And so a small market club can show up into camp in spring and really have hope. Right now, it's a hard sell.
Yeah, you raise the way you put it is so interesting to me. What you're selling is hope, and if everybody knows everything, and there's just a sense of hopelessness, makes it hard to sell tickets, which means you're not selling hot dogs, which means you're putting yourself further and further behind, and it's sort of a self-perpetuating problem. We do have these massive disparities in the World Series. The Dodgers spent $100 million more on their roster than I think the Blue Jays were spending for all of 2025. I think the Dodgers, I think they were at like something like 268 million, and the White Sox all the way at the other end were at 17 million. I think you all did about 86 million in St. Louis. I was surprised, frankly, the other day that Dave Roberts, the manager of the Dodgers, said there should be a salary cap. So I'm just going to ask you for the inside scoop. What is the current conversation in baseball and among executives on the possibility of a salary cap? And I'll toss this on. If it could wave a magic wand, what would this system look like in a perfect world?
Okay. A lot of good questions there. I think from an industry standpoint right now, it's not so much driven by the word salary cap or the phrase salary cap. It's just, how do we close the gap between using the Dodgers or the Yankees, and then using your Pittsburghs, your Clevelands, and kind of squeeze that? So what's driving that? One is, local revenue. Obviously, the larger market teams have the ability to generate more. And then when you're looking at this pie of revenue, how can we spread it out enough to where the teams on the bottom, the floor, can come up and be participants, if you will, in the free agent market, not have to trade off their best players, and find a way that, if they squint hard enough, they can see themselves competing in October. Right now, we're not there. And I think that's the biggest challenge. And when you ask about a salary cap specifically, obviously then it's countered with, well, there should be some form of a floor.
Mm.
I think everybody would agree with that. I think that when you think about the Players Association, for example, like, ultimately, what are they really trying to protect? Is it creating more dollars in the overall market, or is it trying to protect the most elite player being able to get the most amount of money in free agency. And that's tough because as a reminder, there's 1,200 members in the Players Association. So, not all of them are making millions and millions of dollars. And so it's a really tough challenge. And I think the one thing I'd say to you right now, and it's not really, punting on the question, but the commissioner's office has some really smart people that are going to work on this. The Players Association has some really smart people representing them. And ultimately you're hoping that these two sides can come together so there is not a work stoppage. Right now we still have time on our side. And given the intelligence of these two groups, you hope they can solve this Rubik's Cube because in the end, the best thing for this game is no work stoppage, people are playing, and that every 4 or 5 years, we're not having an economic discussion about why we're frustrated with the game. And that's ultimately what you want to get to. And look, I've talked to players all the time who they understand the frustrations, but they also are in a union. And so it's a very slippery slope for them. And for me, I've obviously worked on the management side for 33 years, and that's what I represent. But when we all take a step back, what's best for the game is the game of baseball being played.
So you're raising this conversation that's going on between the players and the owners, this agreement that they have to negotiate from time to time. And there is a looming specter of a baseball strike. People remember the 94 strike, the World Series, I guess, was canceled. But baseball sort of rebounded in 98 thanks to the, Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa home run chase. But a lot of fans didn't come back. And, I think a lot of people just remember that as undermining the bond that they felt with the game. Let me ask you this. What do you think baseball fans want to see from teams and players in this negotiation moving forward here? And how detrimental would it be if there was a work stoppage?
Well, I definitely think a work stoppage would not be great for the game. Anytime you're not playing, it's not a good thing. What do I think the fans want to see is compromise. Um, they look at the argument of millionaires versus billionaires as not one that many want to weigh in on. In other words, they feel like both millionaires and billionaires have won, so figure it out. And so, as we approach this, and again, we have over a year to do this, you're hoping that both sides realize that, and they realize what's at stake. And if you think about it too, in the terms of like, owners have a longer window, right? An owner of a team may be someone who owns it for 30 years. What's the length of a player's career? Their windows are shorter. And by not playing the game of baseball, that's not in their best interest. And so ultimately, you hope cooler heads prevail. You hope everybody understands that trying to find a model that does create competitive balance is in everybody's best interest. Because even though we have things in place now with a salary or payroll tax, it's still not allowing the bottom third to truly compete on a regular basis. And that's ultimately what you want to do. And so when you run a baseball team, what you'd really like to be able to say is like, look, we're doing it right. We're making smart decisions and we're being rewarded for it. What you don't want to do is say like, look, I can't get our payroll over 85 million. Therefore, I have no chance.
Yeah, I was looking at some polling data on this the other day. A recent poll showed that 69% of casual baseball fans said they support a salary cap. But then you get among avid baseball fans, and the numbers went up. People that watch the games the most, that number went up to 79%. When you're thinking about public opinion among the fans, the people who show up at the ballpark and participate in the game, does anyone ever bring that up in the room when these negotiations are going on? Does anyone ever say, "Hey, I read that the fans want this, or the fans are feeling that," or is that sort of not something that gets discussed when these negotiations are occurring?
I've never actually sat at the table in one of these CBA negotiations, but I will say the last round, I did have a unique seat in the sense of they were doing it right outside my office. So every now and then, Tony Clark or someone would pop in, but I do think they're very much aware of what these polls are showing. They know what's driving public sentiment, and in a way they have to, right? Because none of us exist without fans. right? If everybody stops showing up, we have a problem. So, we have to listen to what our fans are saying, and that should be moving needles for both sides.
Yeah, I've always wondered if players or executives, when you walk out on the field and you look around a stadium and you see a lot of empty seats, does that impact the psyche of a player? Does that change the emotions in a clubhouse? Do people see those kinds of things and have reaction to it, or do they try to tune those things out?
They're very much aware, and it's hard not to be. If you have the opportunity to play in a ballpark that's 30,000 plus a night, that's impactful. And then you go to another place and you're drawing maybe 10,000. There's a big difference, and that vibe and that energy is real, and players see it. And you also see it a lot in October because those games become louder, more intense. And what are players trying to do? Deep breath, slow it down so they can perform. And it's real.
So, really, what we're talking about here, Mo, is how do we get more teams to be more competitive? More competitive teams means more fans in the seats, and you get this, positive vibe going for baseball. I have to ask you, if we had had a true salary cap system with a cap and a floor over the last decade, how do you think that would have changed things for the Cardinals? You dealt with the system that you had, but had that been in place, do you think it would have made a market like St. Louis more competitive? I mean, the fans are a little bit out of shape right now in St. Louis. I'm sure you're aware of that. But would this system have made things better for a team or organization like the Cardinals?
Well, you think back to sort of that time frame, the biggest decision we had to deal with at the time was Albert. You know, would our trajectory have changed had he stayed with us? Would his have changed had he stayed with us? Um, there's always that hindsight question, but I do think if the free agent market in a way, if I'm saying this correctly, was smaller in the sense of giving us more chances to compete against more of the elite free agents, of course I think we would have been able to be more competitive. But then in this type of system, then the reality comes back to then who drafts well and who develops well. And, if you're doing that, you have a chance to be successful.
All
Like
right.
you're right about the Cardinals too. Like we're not, last couple of years haven't been what we thought they were going to be.
Hmm.
But the good thing is right now their farm system's number one.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hope in the younger players. I guess a lot of folks are looking at maybe one more year of muddling through here while the development occurs. But St. Louis fans, as you know, take a long-term view of things, and so we're hopeful out here in Cardinal Nation. We're talking to the former president of baseball operations and general manager of the St. Louis Cardinals. So, Mo, we like to do rapid fire on the show sometimes. So I'm gonna give you some rapid fire questions. These are designed to be yes or no, and if you go beyond yes or no, it has to be very short answers. So I'm going to start here. What of the recent rules changes work? Did this work? Yes or no? Instant replay, which, by the way, isn't really instant, but did instant replay help baseball? Yes or no?
Yes.
Did the pitch clock?
Yes.
Ghost runner in extra innings?
Yes.
Banning the shift?
Yes.
Larger bases?
Yes.
So you are fully supportive of all the rules changes. Well, if the ghost runner is so good, why don't they use it in the World Series?
Okay. So here's why I'm an advocate for the putting the runner on second. Um, when you have a roster to manage of 26 players and you play a 17 or 18 inning game, you're having to turn over three or four pitchers. And right now we've put in rules that don't allow us the flexibility to option players back and forth quite as easily as we used to be 5 or 10, 15 years ago. So if we want to start changing those rules again, then I'm fine with getting rid of the runner on second. But we currently are very restrictive on how quickly we can bring someone back from Memphis to the big leagues.
All right, fair enough, fair enough. And here's a prospective rules question. Are you now, as a fan, looking forward to automated strike zones and the challenge system that's coming to Major League Baseball?
I am, yes.
Do you think eventually all balls and strikes will be automated?
I do. I just think technology, just as it continues to evolve, is just going to welcome that. And I'm very close with umpires. You're still going to need umpires. You're still going to need a home plate umpire. There's going to be plays at the plate. What if the system goes down? So it's not like we're just trying to get rid of the human worker. It's going to be it's just almost easier. And the problem too with our game today is with gambling being involved, you have to get things right.
I want to get to gambling in just a moment because I do have a question about. Well, I'll just ask it right now. I think it's this coming season. It'll be the first time you can gamble on baseball at Busch Stadium in St. Louis. We've had an influx of gambling in baseball and all over professional sports. We've seen indictments. We've seen a lot of turbulence in this out there. Is gambling good or bad for baseball the way it's constructed right now?
I'm going to answer this somewhat pathetically, but I'm going to say I don't know. I mean, I grew up in the game following Rule 21. You just didn't gamble.
Right.
So that's how I was brought up. But I know what's happening in the world. It does create interest in the game. Younger people today enjoy placing bets and then engaging in the game versus, my generation more or less just watched the game because I wanted to watch baseball. So finding ways to get more eyes on the game are important. Obviously you don't want your demographic aging and aging out, so you got to get younger people involved.
All right, here's three yes or no's. Should these players be in the Hall of Fame? Dale Murphy,
Yes.
Don Mattingly,
Yes.
Pete Rose.
Yes.
All right, three yeses. Okay. I want to ask you a question. This was submitted to me by my close friend. His name is Joe Arnold. He's from Belleville, Illinois. He's probably the biggest Cardinals fan I know. He contends that the most exciting play in baseball is a sacrifice fly. Do you agree or disagree? And if you disagree, what, in your opinion, is the most exciting play that can happen on a baseball field?
The most exciting play, he said, sacrifice fly.
He loves plays at the plate. He thinks it's a catch, it's a throw, and it's a bang bang play at the plate. When no one gets more excited about sacrifice flies than this guy. He loves
Okay,
it.
okay, I would disagree. I think a squeeze is
Oh,
more exciting and clearly doesn't happen as often. And think of how many sacrifice flies there are that there's never even a throw to the plate.
hmm.
So anyway, we'll give him something to think about.
All right, absolutely. Okay, question. Obviously, as a general manager, as the head of baseball operations, you're getting a lot of commentary on the decisions that you're making out there. A lot of that commentary coming via social media. While you were serving in this position with the Cardinals, did you have a dummy Twitter or X account where you were following the commentary and perhaps commenting on things?
Okay. So I'm going to answer this honestly. I did have an account. Um, it was, I wasn't trying to do it like as I was hidden because I was never responding, but I don't think anybody actually knew who it was because they're just random numbers and letters. But, a matter of fact, I kind of stopped like doing the whole Twitter thing about 7, 8 years ago because it just became so noisy.
Hmm. And when you had the account, how hard was it to like look away? Because I mean, they always tell you. I face this in my job. Don't read the comments. Don't read the comments. Does the commentary from social media? I mean, it sounds like you tried to tune it out, but do you know guys in baseball who sort of get trapped in the vortex of following the social commentary?
Of course, of course. I mean, like, you could come up to my box and watch a game in the old days, and like there are guys just like on their phones scrolling through Twitter, and it's just like it's not healthy, right? And obviously we all have egos. We all want to think we're doing things right, making the right decision from time to time, but like it's tough. And a lot of the decisions we make, it's actually worse than politics, really, because like like at least in politics, 51% voted for you, whereas like no one's voting for me or our decisions. So if we make a bad one, we wear it.
All right, 2011. Be honest. Where was your confidence meter in the ninth inning, game six of the World Series, down to your last strike, down to the Rangers? Had you resigned yourself to a bad ending to the World Series? And to this day, can you believe the most incredible game and the most incredible comeback in Major League Baseball history?
Confidence level pretty low. Started jotting some notes on what I was going to say to the club. And then obviously David Freeze allowed me to roll that up and throw it out. And yeah, the rest was history. But it was incredible. Couple
Who,
days.
who will manage a baseball team in the major leagues first? Albert Pujols or Yadier Molina?
Boy, that's sort of a tough question for me to answer because friends with both. But I think both are going to get a chance. I think, right now with Albert doing TV, he's out there. So I think a lot of people are familiar with him. That's going to help him. And then, of course, Yachty, I think, is going to Mexico this summer to keep, grinding away. But, both love the game. Both are super intelligent. And I think at some point they'll get their chance.
All right. In a couple of years, if the Cardinals held a reunion and asked everybody that's ever been with the organization to come back, and you have to wear a single player's jersey to this reunion, what jersey would you wear?
Hmm. Boy.
While you think about it, I'll tell
No,
you mine.
okay, well, I would do Red Shandy's out of respect because he was so kind to me over my years here. Um, I would do Scott Rowland because he and I were really good friends in his time here. And then I would do Paul Goldschmidt because he's probably the nicest human being you'll ever meet.
So I would pick childhood hero Jack Clark. And I know he wasn't with the Cardinals for many years, but he coincided with my little league first baseman dumb, and I idolized the Ripper, and so I think I would pick. But I got to tell you, having a Wayno jersey on too is pretty special. All right, final question, and we'll let you go. What artifact do you have from your long career in baseball that you most treasure?
Um, so when I started my career, I worked for the Colorado Rockies and I knew nothing about the game. My parents didn't work in the game, and Don Zimmer took me under his wing. And when he stepped away from the Rockies, he gave me his fungo bat, and I still have it today. And I have a not a large collection of stuff over the years, but as you can imagine, over time you do it. But I still keep that one prominently displayed, so it's a cool one.
Amazing conversation today. You've been a wonderful guest on the Scott Jennings Show. Thanks for illuminating us on this conversation about salary caps. It's true, right? Major League Baseball is the last major sports league without a system like this, right?
That is correct. Yeah,
Yeah, and I guess in your opinion, it's worked out for everybody else, and something to think about for Major League Baseball.
I think that's a good way of saying it. Yes.
All right, it's the Scott Jennings Show. Mo, hopefully we can do this again sometime. It's been a great honor to speak with you. Thanks for being with us today.
Awesome.